morning. My name is Dan Key. I'm an attorney in Paducah with the law firm of Washburn, Key and Lowry. I have with me today Zach McMillan, who is an attorney with McMurray and Livingston. We're going to talk to you today about real estate, but not a general program like we have in the past. We're going to get a little bit more specific. And one of the areas that we want to discuss is an area that is a hot topic nationwide concerning foreclosures and subprime lenders. And I'm going to let Zach explain to you a little bit about the foreclosure proceedings and what a subprime lender is, and then to a certain extent how we've gotten into this problem. So Zach, if you would go ahead and explain to the folks about the subprime issues and the foreclosure issues.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. A lot of people have heard in the national news that we're in a bit of a mortgage crisis, and we have a lot of clients that we do loan closings for, and people seem to be very interested in what all this means. You know, what is a subprime mortgage? Is all this really true? Are we really in crisis? And then also how it affects us here in Paducah and McCracken County. And that's kind of what I'd like to talk about. What is a subprime loan? The crisis, is it real? Is it perceived? And then kind of bring it back home to how it affects us here. Generally, when we talk about subprime mortgages, we're talking about loans that have non-ideal rates. In other words, there are certain types of mortgages that have what we would consider good rates, low interest rates that are fixed, non-adjustable. They don't go up as the mortgage indexes go up. And because of that, if the interest rate doesn't go up, people's payments under those loans don't go up. There's another class of loans that are called subprime loans, and they're not bad in and of themselves. It just means that they don't have those ideal terms that these other prime loans have. And the reason these things exist basically is for people who don't have good credit scores, have employment issues, just for some reason, whatever it might be, don't have access to prime loans, don't qualify. So subprime loans are there to help people buy houses that otherwise wouldn't qualify for home loans. Now, when people take a subprime loan, like I said, they're not getting ideal rates. Generally, they're characterized by adjustable interest rates. A lot of people have heard the term ARM, an adjustable rate mortgage. What happens with those, a lot of times initially you'll start off at a somewhat low interest rate, but that interest rate will fluctuate. It's not fixed. And generally speaking, over time, mortgage indexes go up, and that forces their payments to go up. Beside ARMs, there's other types of subprime mortgages, interest-only loans, things called pick-your-payment loans. A lot of times when you get into these, you're making your payments, but you're really just treading water because you might be paying a lot in interest, but you're not really paying any principal down, so you're not really chipping away at the debt that you have. The crisis that we're seeing, the so-called subprime mortgage crisis, has a lot to do with what's called the housing bubble. Nationally speaking, how home prices are down, the values, and a lot of people think that we're in a national bubble. Other people think that in certain areas home prices have decreased, since their highs in about 2006. Generally speaking, real estate markets are local, they're regional. We don't have one national market. There's certain trends. Prices might go up in one area and down in another. Alan Greenspan, when he was the Fed chairman, he said that instead of one huge bubble in the United States, we have more of a froth. In other words, a lot of little bubbles that, when added together, make one big mortgage bubble. The easiest way a lot of people understand this is what happened to the dot-com stocks. Back in early in this decade, you had the prices of like Yahoo and some other internet stocks, basically start from nothing and go through the roof. And those new higher values were just unsustainable. So at some point there had to be a drawback. Prices had to come back to a sustainable level. And that's a lot what we're seeing with the real estate market.
I saw in USA Today yesterday, they had some of the markets that were supposedly the hot markets, such as San Diego, the Tampas, and some of these areas were down 15 to 19% in the last reporting area, because it's exactly what you say. They ran up and they were hot, and then suddenly they weren't sustainable, and so they've seen those prices decline. So that is certainly an effect.
Right. And how this crisis came about is both these things working in conjunction. You've got the increased rates of subprime mortgages, people taking more subprime mortgages, and then also you have housing prices falling. So what happens is people, take these huge loans based on that initial high value of the home, and now the housing prices are falling. Their rates are going up. They can't refinance because the value's not there in the house anymore, and also they're having trouble unloading the houses, selling them because the value's not there. So that causes people to default, in other words, not be able to make their payments under their loans, which leads the banks to have to foreclose, in other words, to file a court action to get the house back, or to just recover what's due to them under the loan.
Weren't some of these properties, and one of these reasons for the rapid inflation, what they were calling flipping the houses? Someone would buy a house and get an interest-only loan, assuming that it was going to continue increasing in value and building equity, and then they would sell it and make a profit on that. But when the demand went down, then the flippers got caught with a house that they really that wasn't selling, and they lost money on it. And a lot of those folks could not afford to lose the money because they were in it in a big way.
Right, exactly. And that kind of goes to the issue of whether this crisis we're in is real or perceived. Depending on where you look, the percentage of subprime loans as a total of all loans in the United States is generally thought to be less than 10%. I've seen figures anywhere from 1% to 6%. So that tells you that not all, it's a very small percentage of loans that we're dealing with. And then also, like you said, a lot of these things, people who went out and took these subprime mortgages weren't necessarily owner-occupants. They weren't buying the house to live there. A lot of people were speculating in the real estate market. After that dot-com crash, people pulled a lot of money out of the stock market because they viewed it as so volatile and thought real estate was a better investment because, traditionally real estate doesn't lose value over time. The fallacy there, real estate can lose value, but it's valuated so infrequently that it just looks smooth. I mean, there can be, rises and falls in the value of homes, but it's just, it's not a daily thing like we see in the stock market. So, I don't perceive that there's a lot of people losing their homes because of this particular issue. Now, there's a lot of other things. We're in slow growth economy right now. People do find money tight. A lot of this is because of this subprime market. Because of this crash, banks are losing a lot of money. Banks that lent these kind of risky loans, that are going into default, they're losing a lot of money, which causes liquidity issues with the banking system. In other words, money's not readily available like it should be, which hurts in the capital economy. And that has ripple effects through the whole economy. And then, of course, with gas prices going up and things like that, money is just tight. So, the real problem with all this might be down the road, where if the government steps in and puts even more regulations on banks, it might be hard for your average consumer to go and borrow money.
Is the Federal Reserve reduction in the interest rate that we hear about, and I know they cut another 1/4 of a point recently, is this an attempt to free up some more money to the banks to make more money available? Could you explain a little bit about what that is going to drive?
Right. The Fed, as you know, has dropped rates several times over the last few quarters, and they do that to free up money in the economy. In other words, if the theory is that if money's out there being spent in the economy, it's just a boom woggle, it trickles out throughout the whole economy, and lowering rates is one way to do that. When the Fed lowers rates, it doesn't directly affect the mortgage rates. Generally speaking, mortgages are controlled by an index called the LIBOR index. It's LIBOR, and I can't even begin to tell you. It's based in London. I don't remember what the whole acronym means, but it does indirectly affect mortgage rates in that, if money is freer, banks are freer to lend money, for residential or commercial real estate loans.
Okay. Well, talk a little bit about foreclosure and what goes on with a foreclosure then. We've mentioned that, and we're seeing foreclosures rise.
Right.
So,
the foreclosure is the technical term for the legal concept of when a lien holder has a lien against a property, some kind of monetary obligation that's due to them, and it's not being paid. In other words, it's in default, which is the technical term for the breach of a loan agreement. They have the right, generally speaking, even if one or two payments are missed, under these loan documents, they have the right to accelerate the note, meaning call the whole thing due at once. And if the borrower wasn't able to pay back that whole right then, the bank can file this action to collect all the money that's due to them.
well, you would think if they couldn't make the monthly payment,
Well,
it's going to be impossible for them to pay the entire balance that's due on that debt.
You're certainly right, and that's a lot of people, foreclosures. A lot of them are when borrowers just vacate the premises or something like that. One thing to keep in mind: most banks, the way I see it, don't jump to foreclose on things. Administratively, it's just not a good economic thing to do because foreclosure is a lengthy process. Banks have to pay attorneys, and let's be honest, they don't like paying attorneys any more than anybody else does. To take it through this process, probably it's better from their bottom line to actually keep the borrower in the loan, however that might be done, to modify the terms of the loan, that kind of thing. So I generally see foreclosure as a last resort. Let me talk about what happens a little bit. The bank files an action to actually foreclose on the property. All the defendants, anyone who has a potential interest in the property, is served in that lawsuit. And then basically at the conclusion, once all the defenses are filed and there's no valid defense, the bank will ask the court to appraise the property and then have the master commissioner, which is a court-appointed attorney, to come in and sell the property at a public auction. Generally speaking, banks don't necessarily buy the property themselves at those auctions. The public has a right to bid. They're held what's called at the courthouse steps. It's a public thing. Anyone can come, and whoever the highest bidder is will actually get the property. And the money from that sale will go to the plaintiff, the bank, the original loan holder, to pay back with the money that's owed to them.
You said something about the court orders an appraisal of the property in this foreclosure proceeding. Why do they do that?
Well, there's a thing called the statutory right of redemption, and basically that's a 3-year window for the person who's being foreclosed upon to have an opportunity to buy back the property if less than 2/3 of the appraised value is paid at that auction for the property. So what would happen, if someone paid less than 2/3 for the property at the auction of that appraised value, within 3 years, the people who are foreclosed upon, if they could pull the money together, could buy back the property from the successful bidder at the price that bidder paid plus legal interest. And that can be a real detriment to someone who bought the property. If you bought it real cheap, and then put a lot of improvements into the property, you might end up losing money. The value of the improvements, the value added that you put into the property.
So what would happen would be that if I bought this property for less than 2/3 the appraised value, and I said I've got a great deal on this, and I go out and make improvements, and this original owner says I'm going to assert my right of redemption because you didn't pay 2/3, and I'm going to pay you the amount that you paid for the property, the low amount that I paid, plus the statutory interest rate, and get it back. And I may have put $50,000 or $75,000 in that property that I would stand to lose. So really, that is enough reason for one to pay the 2/3 appraised value.
That's correct. And you don't see that happen. I think most people who bid on these things are savvy enough to know that you need to pay that 2/3 to cut off that right. And,
Okay.
that's the only thing that need to be done to cut off the statutory right of redemption is just, literally pay over 2/3 of the value at the sale.
Well, what happens if the bank buys this property back? I mean, they're not in the real estate business. They're not in rental business. What do they do with this property?
Generally speaking, they want to get rid of it as soon as they can. Like you said, most banks aren't in the real estate business. They don't want to hold the house. They don't want a lot of assets tied up in things like houses that aren't very liquid. In other words, aren't freely transferable. So they will sell the house themselves. And at that point, you could get a really good deal, considering if the bank, paid 2/3 at the foreclosure sale, cut off the right of redemption, the bank can turn around and sell it to you for less than that. They don't have to meet that 2/3 again. So you could end up getting it for less than it's actually worth.
And you might also talk with the bank and get a good interest rate,
Right.
because the bank wants to unload this property, and it would then become off their books, so to speak, and they wouldn't be holding it as a detriment. Okay.
That's right. If I could, real quick, I wanted to run through a couple numbers. Like I said, the mortgage crisis seems to be more regional. Areas like Florida, Michigan, certain markets, there was a huge run-up in value, and then now we're having a huge drop in value of homes. And that's where this crisis seems to really be hitting large metropolitan areas too. Here in Paducah, I got a couple numbers from the Paducah Board of Realtors to kind of flush it out what's happening here. We do see that home sales are down a little bit. They've measured from January to March of last year as compared to the same period for this year. And overall, the number of houses sold is down 6%. So probably that has to do with the national news, people not wanting to put money into real estate, money being tight, that kind of thing. But what I did find interesting is the average price of homes sold here is actually up 5%, which would lead me to believe that we don't have a big problem with home prices dropping here. And probably the reason for that, we never saw a huge escalation in home values here, so we're not having a huge drawback. In other words, Paducah is a pretty static market. It doesn't have huge swings one way or another. We seem to be kind of isolated from national trends. Some people joke around that Paducah gets everything about 10 years later. So maybe we'll see this in the future, but we're just not seeing it now. And then also, I thought it was interesting that the average time that a house stays on the market this period this year as compared to last year is actually down 13%. So that kind of contradicts with what we hear in the national news, that people are trying to sell homes and they just can't get rid of them. Yeah. In other words, they just sit on the market forever and they keep having to lower their price in order for these houses to sell. Here, the values of homes being sold is actually up, and they're spending less time on the market, which would lead me to believe that our, local real estate market is actually probably doing pretty well.
And that's good, and I'm certain the realtors are glad to hear that. I wanted to talk a little bit about condemnation or eminent domain. And eminent domain is the right of a governmental entity to take your property or a private citizen's property for a public use. This is statutory, it is constitutional, both state and federal. And some of the entities that are allowed to do this, or that are given the grant of power to do this, are your cities, your counties, your states, your highway departments, airports, utilities such as overhead and underground utilities, electrical, gas, water, etc. Housing authorities, railroads have the power of eminent domain. We don't see that much anymore. We did 100 years ago when the railroads were constantly expanding their routes. But what this says, and I want to limit this to Kentucky because the federal law is a little different, but in Kentucky, the property can only be taken for a public use as opposed to a public purpose, which is a federal requirement, and certain other states have that. Public use means it can only be used for the public to improve the area. Now, public use could be defined, a public purpose could be defined as taking your home for the city to provide incentives to build a shopping mall. Well, that's not allowed in Kentucky. But you can, and also you can only take what title and what property would be necessary for the public use. The law and Constitution both require that the property owner be compensated, and the compensation can either be reached by a negotiation with the public utility, or by the city or the county or the state, or it can be granted to you by a jury award. If you cannot negotiate with the and I'll call this a condemnor, that's a person that seeks to condemn the property. If you cannot come to some agreement with them, then what they do is they adopt a resolution that the property is required. They file a petition in court. Then the court appoints 3 commissioners. These 3 commissioners have to be impartial owners of land within the county. As a practical matter, they're usually realtors or appraisers that have no prior attachment or prior conflict in this specific issue. And they come back with a report within 15 days to the court stating what they think the value is. Well, if you agree with that value, then you can agree to do nothing further, and basically the property becomes the property of the condemnor. However, if once this is done, the court will enter or the court will require a summons to be issued with the petition and the award, and you can file an answer only at that time contesting the issue of whether the state has the power to condemn. If they don't have the right to condemn, then the court will make a determination sitting without a jury. If they have the right to condemn, then the court will also make that determination. If then the court makes the determination, or if no answer is filed setting up or questioning the power, then you can file an exception to the commissioner's award. And once you file that exception, then the condemnor can pay the money in court and they can take possession of the property. Or they don't have to do that, but it gives them the right to possess. You can also take the money out at that time, but if your award comes back where it's less than you've taken out, then you've got to repay that portion with 6% interest. And the court can order you off the property once the possession is granted. Now we go to trial, and both parties will bring in their experts. And experts are generally appraisers that have lots of experience. A jury is selected, a jury will hear the evidence, and a jury will come back with an award. Now the appraisers will tell the value of the property immediately before the taking and immediately after the taking and immediately, and then what you do is you subtract those numbers, and that gives you the value of the property that was taken. There are lots of ways that appraisers come up with these values, and they all will come in with, and both sides will have their, we call them hired guns, because they will have their numbers. If it's condemnor, their numbers will generally be a little lower. If it's the property owner, the numbers will be a little higher. But the jury hears this evidence, makes an award, and the award has to be within the range of the testimony that was presented. And then at that time, once that is done, if the condemnor has not taken possession, they can take possession. If they don't take possession, then they see the award is too high, they can abandon their claim to the property, their claim under condemnation, and basically walk away from the issue. And what you do is you get your property back, they get their money and that they paid into court, and they can withdraw that, and both parties are put in the same position as they were prior to condemnation. But I wanted to touch base on this because this seems to be an issue when a road is constructed across your property, or when an overhead power line or an underground sewer line or one of these types of things. But you can tell that a total taking of property, such as a highway, would command a much larger award than if somebody ran an underground sewage line under your property, because your surface rights would not change and your surface area would not change. They would just have the right to access the property. So wanted to touch base on that. Zach, have you had much experience with a condemnation type issue before? I know this is a very specialized practice of law.
We have done a lot of road projects throughout the years where the Commonwealth will be coming in to either expand a road or build a new road. And whenever that happens, title exams have to be done on every parcel of property that's affected along the new roadway. And then it goes into the condemnation part of it, where the property owners affected will have the right to be compensated for what's taken. Generally speaking, I teach here at the college real estate law once a week, and I go over this, generally with people. I think you hit on an important point. It has to be taken for public use, and then just compensation has to be paid. One thing I like to flesh out for people, probably if your property is going to be taken, you're not going to be very successful challenging the public use issue. I think the standard there is fairly low, especially if it's something like a road. You're not going to be able to say the government's not actually taking it for public use. But there is some leeway when it comes to the just compensation part of it. You might be able to get more money for your property than what's originally offered.
Okay. Well, I think we're about out of time, and I want to thank you for assisting me in this, and I appreciate the opportunity for us to go on the air and explain to folks certain issues that are hot button issues out there today. So thank you very much.